welcome to the very best part of my broadcast week. Welcome to a very full table at the Takeout. 3 guests this week. We usually have 1, maybe 2, but this week we're going full court. 3 guests to celebrate something that's going on in the Washington, D.C. area, DC Docs. It's a documentary film festival, and we're going to talk about one of the films I've seen, which I hope you will see, because it's important about everything going on in our country right now. The film is called War Game, and our 3 guests are most definitely attached to that film. To my immediate left, Jesse Moss, co-director. To his left, Tony Gerber and Captain Janessa Goldbeck. Welcome, all of you, to the Takeout.
Hey, Major.
So let me start with you, Jesse. What is the idea behind War Game, and why did you make it?
The idea behind War Game is a simulation in which some folks from 5 presidential administrations game out what happens in the next insurrection, January 6, 2025, in which the U.S. military splits. And there is effectively a military coup in the United States. And I am trying to make sense of our political future. Where are we headed? And this is not backwards looking. This is forwards looking. It's an incredibly credible organization, Janessa's Vet Voice, that put this on. We're documentary filmmakers. We found out about this. We thought this is fascinating. It's an invitation to sit in the White House Situation Room with a president and his advisors as they deal with this crisis.
Janessa, I introduced you as captain. Introduce yourself to my audience a little bit and what Vet Voice is and what the motive is behind this particular project.
Yeah, thanks, Major. Janessa's fine. I'm out of the Marine Corps now. I served just under
Once
7
a Marine,
years.
always a Marine.
That's right. But a full-fledged civilian veteran now. I served for 7 years as a combat engineer officer in the United States Marine Corps, and now I run a national organization called Vet Voice Foundation, which is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that works to elevate the voices of veterans and military families in conversations around policy or issues of the day that impact them. So we saw what happened on January 6th. We saw the disproportionate number of veterans who participated in the January 6th insurrection. We've also seen the data coming from very credible sources and our own agencies around the rise of extremism across our society, but in the military community. So we wanted to examine that problem, and we thought, what better way to do it than by bringing in folks who have held positions of power very proximate to these positions, if not them themselves, to actually war game the scenario out.
And Tony, a phrase that comes up in Washington and other state capitals is a tabletop exercise. Right. Not everyone's familiar with that, but that's what this movie is. This movie watches a real tabletop exercise. Carry it on from there.
That's right, yeah. I mean, so we didn't stage this, right?
These people are not reading lines.
Completely unscripted.
Okay.
And so we came to this, and for us as documentary filmmakers, it was like shooting the Super Bowl. It's live. There's no opportunity to call, hold there, reset, take it again. It was a moving train. And if we didn't keep up, we lost it, right? And the extraordinary thing to me as a filmmaker was we had an opportunity to point a camera at something that was artificial, was a construct, right? Like a theatrical improvisation. And in the course of watching this thing, it becomes more real than real. So it's this wonderful sort of theatrical alchemy. You know, people go to the theater and they know that those are actors on stage. They know it's a proscenium march. They know those are props. You know, they know there's no real liquor in the bottle, right? But somehow by the end, they're deeply, deeply moved.
Right.
And that is what happens with our film.
And of course, this show exists on many platforms. For those listening, podcast, radio, pay close attention. I'm going to play a clip here that you can watch on Paramount Plus or CBS News streaming. It's from the movie War Game, the documentary, where the rules of the game are established by one of the participants, former United States Senator Heidi Heitkamp. Let's roll that.
All of us are here today because we are increasingly concerned by the rise of domestic extremism and radicalization in this country, specifically within the active duty military forces. I don't need to tell you that the alarms are flashing red. Most of you have at one point sworn under oath to protect and defend the Constitution. Today we'll examine a frightening scenario. What happens when those in uniform break that oath?
I think what brought us all together is a need to be better prepared. And the exercise is Introduction to Coup Prevention 101.
I'm a retired lieutenant general. I spent 37 years in the Army. I'm pretty adamantly nonpartisan, In fact, that was one of my conditions for participation, that it was not a partisan exercise, because this should not be about politics. This is about security.
So, again, I want to emphasize this because when I was watching it, I wasn't sure. These are people who are former officials in government debating what to do based on information coming into them and responding under a time clock. And again, nothing was written for them, correct?
Just the parameters of the game.
Right.
And there are certain key events. They're called tentpole injects, if you're an expert on wargaming, in which the role players have to make a decision that sort of sends them one way or the other. And the drama escalates. So we start with what feels like January 6, 2021, but quickly escalates around the country. And that is the threat that the role players, the president and his advisors, have to try to contain. So they are acting on their experience as professionals in the military, former generals. You mentioned Senator Heidi Heitkamp. We have people who worked in the CIA. So these people bring incredible experience and credibility. And we didn't know if they could act, frankly, but they are so good and so smart that it's gripping. Tony and I were watching this unfold, and really it felt like we were in the White House Situation Room.
And Janessa, the differentiating factor in this documentary is this concept, and I want you to drill down a little bit on it for me, of a split military, of divided loyalties, of picking sides with weapons and tactics.
We know that veterans and active duty military folks are targeted for recruitment into extremist ideologies and groups across the United States. We know that they're targeted because veterans and members of the military have cross-partisan respect and appeal in our society, which makes us incredibly effective vectors for mis and disinformation. And people want to follow folks who have military experience and tactical experience. There is just a social and societal respect for these folks. So we don't believe that the entire military, that it's likely that 50% of the U.S. military defects or follows the calls for a military coup or something of that nature. But we do believe that there are some individuals, we've seen them in folks like General Michael Flynn, now a convicted felon, who have bought into conspiracy theories about our election failures, who have called for violence, and their impact is outsized and something that we really need to be concerned about as a society at large.
One of the themes in the documentary is disillusionment among those still active duty or recently retired from military service. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I think that anyone who feels disillusioned or disaffected, whether they served in the military or not, is looking for community. They're looking for a place to connect with others and find purpose and meaning. And that is what makes these extremist groups so dangerous. They offer that, and they offer a path forward. We have a number of individuals, a bipartisan group of experts and leaders who participated in this game, including Elizabeth Newman, who played our Homeland Security Advisor. She worked as a Deputy Homeland Security Advisor under President Trump, and she's studied extremist movements in the United States. That's her career. And something that she says when we're having conversations about this film is that everyone who has participated or sucked in is motivated by a grievance of some sort, real or perceived. And that grievance drives them to seek community and to find an outlet.
So it's just not administrations not named Trump who participated in this.
You know, what made it fascinating for Tony and myself is the president and his advisors have an opponent in the game, and they are played by former members of the U.S. military, former Marine and Army veteran who have deployed in combat and bring that experience and disillusionment with the country in creating their role to be the opposition force in this war game. And getting to know them was really illuminating, I think, for all of us.
The voice of Jesse Moss. We have Tony Gerber here, also Janessa Goldbeck, talking about the documentary War Game. More on that documentary, more clips. And thanks to Carmine's, our special host this week. Segment 2 of the Takeout coming your way in just one moment.
1 in 5 of the people who participated in the January 6th insurrection were veterans, which is wildly disproportionate to our numbers in society.
Welcome back to Takeout. Welcome back to Carmine's, one of our favorite places in D.C. Very glad they're hosting us, celebrating D.C. Docs Film Festival as the title indicates, celebrates documentaries. And we're talking about the film War Game. I am joined by, in order to my left, Jesse Moss, Tony Gerber, and I will always call her Captain Janessa Goldbeck. I want to play a clip for you now from the film because it sort of sets the stage for this idea of someone of visibility, as imagined in this film, complaining about an election and vowing to use tactics, extrajudicial, illegal tactics, to eject the sitting president and elect someone else. Let's play that.
A new video has been released on social media by the heads of the so-called Order of Columbus, the extremist group which has long challenged the legitimacy of the U.S. government. Retired Army Lieutenant General Roger Sims, who the order refers to as the Patriarch, is claiming to have evidence of a stolen election, and the group is backing those members of the military who have appeared to have gone rogue. Now, this video was released just a short time ago. We're going to play it for you. A word of warning, some of what you'll hear is disturbing.
We have undertaken an extensive investigation of the 2024 election.
And it is Hotham who is attempting a coup to consolidate his illegitimate power and eliminate our God-given freedoms.
So the Red Cell is motivated not just by a failed candidate who's trying to steal the presidency, but also by a religious figure, someone with military experience who comes with a lot of credibility, like former General Michael Flynn, a convicted felon who spent his career fighting against insurgencies. It is not unrealistic that figures like him could play roles in an attack.
Janessa, this is conceptually something you think about abstractly or worry about practically?
Very practically. I mean, the impetus for this game was the fact that 1 in 5 of the people who participated in the January 6th insurrection were veterans, which is wildly disproportionate to our numbers in society. And when I hear the types of things that are being floated by a major presidential candidate today, when I look at policy plans that are being published that emphasize things like deployment of the National Guard in cities where the governors or the mayors are opponents politically of the sitting president, that is a huge breakdown in our civilian military relationship and what we expect from our leaders. And so we wanted to create a film, I think, and that's why we partnered with Jesse and Tony, that provided an entry point for the American public into this conversation, because it is hard to think about. This is something that most Americans have never seen in their lifetimes, and certainly not in America. And so to have a way to really see it and understand what's at stake and be able to talk about it in a way that isn't just about Trump or Biden or Republicans and Democrats, but about what are the norms in our society that we expect our leaders to preserve.
And Tony, this is not just a DC-based war game tabletop exercise. One of the most riveting components of this tabletop exercise is incoming information from other state capitals.
That's right, yeah. We created a fake news network, which really is the means by which we inject the current events, what's going on live on the ground. And as the insurrection spreads across the country, we turn up the temperature in the room. And it was important for us to create this news network with as much verisimilitude as possible so that it began to feel real for the participants. We couldn't expect them to act. You know, we said they're not actors. We couldn't expect them to act, but we could expect them to feel, right? So as long as their pulses were thumping, right, and their brows were perspiring, we knew that we were doing something right.
And Jesse, there's a time element here. Explain to the audience the time element and why that is so important to getting this truthfulness out of the people who are participating.
Yeah, well, the simulation is modeled on January 6, 2021, which is the certification of the electoral vote, and which, and that crisis was about 4 hours. In this case, it's January 6, 2025, and the group has about 6 hours. Congress is meeting to certify, and that's when this insurrection begins to foment. We've seen that before, but I think it does reflect this kind of inflection friction point or weakness in our system that we know was exploited in our history and could be exploited again. So I think it's a very credible a moment, and the period of time does reflect how quickly events can move and spin out of control. And I think it gives great urgency to the film. You mentioned the national crisis. We see military bases being taken over. We see state capitals that are under siege. You see an alliance between military who have defected and local law enforcement in some cases. These are not far-fetched science fiction. This is actually rooted in recent history. And I think Janessa and her team, I got to say, I was a little dubious when I heard about the project. Like, is this going to be, just magical think? What is this? And I met her and her team. I remember former CIA Director Michael Hayden was there. I thought, holy these people mean business. You've got these retired generals who wrote this op-ed calling for this war game to happen as an exercise in good government. I said, well, they're taking it really seriously. I better take it too. But they're actually not fearmongers. They're really quite hopeful and patriotic Americans, and I love that.
Janessa, that's really important to underscore. So take some time and explain that this was not just a concoction. This is something that people in this space are thinking about, wrote about, and said, we need to examine this. We need to actually play this out.
Right.
That's the genesis of this.
The beginning of this project started, we have, wow, thank you.
Carmine's does not take any days off.
That is
okay?
not
it
what
just
I was expecting.
Doesn't. It rolls
Amazing.
large 7 days a week.
Incredible. The idea for the project came from an op-ed that was written by three retired generals who are all advisors of our organization. And in it, they highlighted their concern about increasing extremism in our society, and in particular in the military. And they called on the administration to take a number of steps to address it. One of those steps was to conduct a war game. And we actually spoke with folks in the administration and in various agencies, as well as on the Hill. And basically everyone said, look, we know this is an issue. There are congressional committees set up to study this. The agencies, three-letter agencies, are putting out reports on this topic. But it's so politicized that if we were to convene this within the administration, it could be construed in a variety of negative ways, used as fodder for conspiracy theorists. And so we thought, well, what better role for a civil society organization to step in? And we have the relationships on both sides of the aisle to bring credible people together to actually be able to participate.
I don't want to overlook what you just said. So, credible people suggest to a sitting administration, you ought to war game this up because this is a real scenario that affects everyone in the country, national security, furtherance of the republic. And the administration probably wisely says, that's a really good idea, but the political environment is too toxic, so we can't do it. I mean, just chew on that for a second, folks. People who are in a position to make decisions like this know it's a good idea, know they should probably be doing it, but feel constrained or nullified from doing it because of the political atmosphere and the conjecture, wild theories, inferences drawn about the very doing of it.
Yeah.
So you had to create another space. You had to create a safe space.
Certainly, and I want to give the administration some credit. I'm sure that there are agencies and planning exercises that are happening that are not that the general public is not privy to. But one of the major points of doing this exercise in public and allowing the public to see it was because there are decisions that everyday Americans are going to have to make in a scenario like this. There are decisions that local leaders outside of Washington are going to have to make, and we thought that the learnings that you pick up from just watching the film or reading the report needed to be shared outside of Washington. And so it was really important for us to step in and do this more public-facing exercise.
The voice of Captain Janessa Goldbeck. I'm also joined by Jesse Moss and Tony Gerber, all associated with the film War Game, part of DC Docs Documentary Film Festival here in DC. Segment 3, continuing our conversation about War Game when we come back.
I think fundamentally the game is not just a film, it's what Senator Heidi Heitkamp calls coup prevention 101.
Welcome back to the Takeout. Welcome back to Carmine's. I hope we will get a shot of this food here. And this breadstick that is also a baton. It could be a bayonet. I'm not exactly sure all the various things you could do with it, but man, does it look good. So, again, to reset the table, it's a very big table here at the Takeout, bigger than usual. From my immediate left, Jesse Moss, Tony Gerber, Captain Janessa Goldbeck, all associated with the movie War Game, which is about the stresses that would land upon the shoulders of people in government should we see a repeat, a possibly more malevolent, more militarized repeat of what we saw on January 6th, 2021. So, Jesse, I want to ask you about not only the time constraints, but the sense of incoming information and what the participants are asked to do. What is the goal? What is the imperative at the end of this 6-hour period? What are they trying to achieve?
Well, they want to make sure that Congress certifies the electoral vote.
That's the ultimate goal.
I think that is the transition, the peaceful transition of power, which is central to the survival of our democracy and under threat. So that is the existential pressure that they feel. But they have to contain these small and then suddenly larger crises that are beginning to spread around the country that have to do with, in some cases, simply messaging, calming the public, managing members of the military who are defecting, how to counter that, how to deal with incoming information and parsing between what is real and what is possibly misinformation. And we see that the president, played by Governor Steve Bullock, and his cabinet are really not as they're not as equipped to deal with the internet misinformation as their opponents. They are sort of fighting an analog battle against a digital threat, and I think that does reflect sort of an asymmetry that we are having to deal with how extremism can spread, recruitment online, and we see some of these forces within the game. And I think that's what makes this exercise in the report that Janessa's organization has generated and shared with policymakers and stakeholders valuable. It's like, I think fundamentally the game is not just a film, it's what Senator Heidi Heitkamp calls coup prevention 101. Mm-hmm. Let's make this a stress test of our democracy. Let's learn from it.
And Tony, I want to mention also about the food here at Carmine's. The central question for the remaining portion of the Takeout will be, will the table legs hold up against this groaning weight of magnificent food? So, Tony, I want to talk about this component because it is one of the many heart-pounding components of War Game. The red team, the opponent, the insurgents, the insurrectionists are dropping social media disinformation rapidly, watching in sort of a kind of malevolent glee how the administration is not responding and the space is open to them. Carry that forward.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. And it brings to mind something I saw this morning on CNN. This idea that America is not a democracy. This is what the MAGA foot soldiers, that's their current marching orders. America isn't a democracy and never has been. It's a republic.
The republic,
right?
constitutional
republic. And
yes.
so when headlines say Trump is a threat to democracy, they're like, well, we're not a democracy. So it's extraudry spin
at
a
no
very,
threat.
very high level.
Right.
No threat, right? So our red cell, led by a gentleman who has made it his business since leaving the military to understand the far right, to understand their tactics and their procedures, brings that to the war game, to our war game, and throws everything in the kitchen sink at these guys, at poor President Hotham, played by Governor Bullock, and his team of advisors, and they're very effective, very effective.
And Janessa, did you see anything overcooked about that particular approach of the red team?
No, actually, they did want to throw everything but the kitchen sink at the blue cell, but we had to really hold them back. What you see in the film is actually, I would say, a tenth of what they initially proposed.
Yeah.
From my perspective, I thought it was important that the players have an opportunity to respond and not just become totally overwhelmed, that we don't learn anything from the red cells injects, and also that we only show things that have already happened, maybe just in a more condensed, slightly dialed up way. So it was very important to me and to us at large that we didn't put things onto film that were inspirational for people who had bad intent, that we only showed things that have already happened, but turn the dial up a notch on them. And so in that way, I think if the red cell, if we had given them full reign to do everything they wanted, the game would have lasted for 15 minutes, and then we would have all been sitting around like, well, democracy was a nice experiment while we had it. So I think, it's important to know, though, with social media in particular, the people in the room are representative of people who serve in these positions today. They are of all ages. They have all various sort of understandings and relationships with technology, social media, and we haven't, as a country, made any real decisions or progress on how we manage the fact that social media companies algorithmically drive people into more extreme corners of the internet and manufacture rage and allow mis and disinformation to flourish on their platforms. And that's the environment we're going into this next election in.
Can I just add, getting to know Janessa and her team, and part of what we were able to do in the film was really understand the backgrounds they bring to this exercise. And one thing that Janessa shared, and I'll ask Janessa to talk about it, was her personal experience with this kind of misinformation and extremism online. And this is not an abstract threat. This comes to roost in all of our lives in different ways. And we got to know these backstories, and we share them with our audience in the film. And I think it's really important to understand the film is not just this thrilling real-time war game, but it's really what motivates these people like Janessa to come and do this and to risk something to do it.
Janessa, share your backstory, please.
Sure. Well, one of my motivations in doing this project and in really shining a light on this problem in our society is from my personal life. My dad is a QAnon person now. I didn't used to be. Has always had a libertarian bent. I was an organizer for Jill Stein back in the day. And when Trump was elected, he started spending more time on the internet. Sort of very a story that many people have connected with. After the film, folks will come up to me and say, I've got a family member who I love and I think is a rational human being, and suddenly they're down this rabbit hole talking about lizard people or conspiracies that are just
body doubles. And
exactly. And so I think there's a lot of families in America that are struggling with how do we deal with the fact that we are living in different realities, whether that's as extreme as someone who's down a conspiracy theory rabbit hole, or just getting their news from very different sources and have a very different conception.
Things that aren't news at all, but masquerade as news.
Exactly. And so how do we overcome that when we're all in these different information environments and we're not all reading off the same script or even have the same idea of what kind of country it is that we're living in?
Well, how do you deal with that with your dad?
For us, we try to find places that we can connect. My stepsister had a baby about 1.5 years ago, and he's a granddad for the first time, and we love spending time with my niece and his granddaughter, and that is a place we can connect. We agree to disagree or not talk about things at the kitchen table or Thanksgiving dinner table, but it's tough. It's not all hunky-dory, and it's challenging, especially when some of his political beliefs feel like a direct threat on my safety as a gay woman, as just a woman in this country generally, in our environment today. And so it's hard, and I don't think that we are in a place in our society where we're necessarily equipped to kind of talk through and work through these issues in a way where we lead with empathy, and we start from a place of empathy and not painting each other further into our corners.
That is the voice of Janessa Goldbeck, Captain, Marine Captain, once a Marine, always Marine. I know that well enough from lots of experience talking to Marines throughout my life. Jesse Moss, Tony Gerber are also here, all associated with the film War Game, part of DC Docs, which is a film festival celebrating, among other things, documentaries. This is a very different kind of documentary, and I urge you to watch it. Carmine's is here. The food is here. I guarantee you we're going to start getting into it. I've been nibbling a little bit. More of that and segment 4 when we come back.
It becomes a kind of ethics lesson in leadership, in reasoned leadership, and not reactive leadership.
Welcome back to Takeout. Welcome back to Carmine's, and the biggest feast for lunch I've ever seen on this June 14th, or any other day for that matter. In order this way, toward me, Janessa Goldbeck, Tony Gerber, Jesse Moss. all associated with the documentary film War Game. Tony, I want to talk to you about this because I want to underscore the point in case it was missed. The 6-hour clock starts, and there is no timeout. The group is not allowed to say, stop, I want to. This is continuous, and what we're observing is the struggle to respond. And I will tell you, watching the film, there were moments when I was thinking to myself, do something more than you're currently doing. This seems awfully passive to me. And S is breaking out in several parts of the country. Why aren't you saying more, doing more? Communicate to the audience what you observed and that component of the film.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us as well, Steve Bullock as President Hotham at various times seems almost passive. But he is really, truly taking stock of the considered judgment around the table. And it becomes a kind of ethics lesson in leadership, in reasoned leadership, and not reactive leadership, right? And I think that that's one of the wonderful takeaways of this film. That you go through this, and as an audience member, you're thinking, do something, do something, do something. I would do something. So through this act of empathy, anyone in the audience can feel that they're in the shoes of the president. What would I do in that situation? I would react. I'd bring in the National Guard. I would shut that S down, But Bullock doesn't do that, And the real challenge to him, and it's the intangible, Senator Heitkamp says to him right before he makes his penultimate speech to the nation, she says, the American people need to know that we still have a democracy.
Right.
And so he goes out there with that as his charge, as his goal. And does he succeed or not? We leave that to the audience. Right.
And Jesse, one of the things that is also so powerful about the film is the red team, the opponents, want to provoke an overreaction. They want the government to come down hard, to create instant martyrs, and essentially answer for the public the question that they're trying to drive as a wedge between us.
Absolutely. The shadow of Waco and Ruby Ridge, that these events that are held up as totems on the extreme right as evidence of government overreach, really, I think they trouble the decision makers, and they know that they are being baited and don't want to take the bait. And it's not a spoiler to say that much of the drama turns on the president's decision to invoke or not invoke the Insurrection Act, this maybe little-known clause that gives the president power to deploy active duty military on domestic soil to manage domestic crises. And it's happened in our history, but it's what somebody in the game calls the nuclear option. It is not something you do hastily because the consequences will potentially threaten our democracy and people's faith in what we are fighting to preserve.
And Tony, I don't want to leave people with the impression that these conversations are all polite or that there are not disagreements. There are disagreements. There is advice being given to the president to do more, be more aggressive, be more active in the social media space, to put out more statements, to do more.
That's right.
And there's this conflict that plays out.
Yeah, there's a disagreement about what effective leadership is, right? There's a discussion of that, right?
And who's winning the perception battle
that's
in real
exactly
time?
Right. Yeah, it's the perception battle. Linda Singh actually says in the game that perception is as important as the actions we take, right? And particularly in this day and age, perception is 90% of it. Right? So.
And Janessa, from your vantage point, thinking about this tactically, whether you're in the military to protect or you're in the insurgent rebellion side trying to undermine, the propaganda space looms as large as it's ever loomed.
Absolutely, and we didn't even get into foreign meddling in our information
space. This is all internal.
We actually made a purposeful decision in the construction of our scenario to keep that out because we felt like...
But we have every reason to believe if this were to happen, foreign actors would.
We know it. I mean, it's happening now in every controversial social conversation that's happening across this country. We know for a fact, it is not a matter of opinion, that foreign actors who want to sow division in our country are flooding the zone with bots and amplifying conflict and creating more vitriol in our spaces because it has a real impact. People become cynical. They tune out all political news. We're seeing a lot of people just completely step away from paying any attention to the politics of the nation because it's too angry, it's too tribal, it's too depressing, and that's the point. Drop out, become disengaged, and then who cares if we have it or not? Who cares? That's what they're driving. And so we didn't even include that in this scenario, but you'll see just the domestic disinformation space was enough to really discombobulate the blue cell.
And of course, this all gets resolved in the course of the movie, but Jesse, let's be candid with my audience. There's not a big, sweet sunset moment.
A Hollywood happy ending.
There's not a Hollywood, there's not a glorious, tightly, intricately
I think we're going to
tied bow at the end of it.
No, we're going to leave that to the American voters to provide for us. And I think the film is
and to say that this stuff is hard.
Yeah, it is hard. And I think this
and in the moments, it feels excruciating.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the problem doesn't go away with this next election.
But I think what I found valuable, because I feel disillusioned and I feel scared and I can sometimes fall prey to cynicism, but meeting Janessa and her team across party lines and the nonpartisan military participants, it's a rare space in American life where people who probably have a lot to disagree about agree about something, which this is valuable. And it actually made me feel hopeful in a dark time. And I think we found in conversations that Janessa and her team have joined with audiences that it's a great springboard to think about this election and what's to come, because it's not date stamped to now. These questions will endure regardless of who's in power and how the threats manifest. So I think I would just point out that we're excited to screen today in DC, but we'll be coming to theaters in August too, and online. So audiences who want to come and hear a conversation or find the film, it's going to be there.
Tony, bring us home.
Yeah, folks want to know where we're screening and where our panel of film participants are. We're hosting Q&As after the film. It's been a wonderful experience to engage with audiences, and in the course of touring the country, we've come to hold on to this idea that it's not red or blue, right? That this issue of democracy is not partisan, and that we have to all come together and agree that there's something sacred that we need to hold on to. And this idea that even the word democracy is under threat right now and being challenged is just terrifying.
The voice of Tony Gerber around an abundant table here at Carmine's, joined by Janessa Goldbeck and Jesse Moss, the three of you. Yes, and the breadstick.
And
don't forget the breadstick, folks.
If folks want to learn more, request a screening, or find out where the film is available, they can go to wargamefilm.com to learn more or request that.
Wargamefilm.com. We'll see you next week, folks.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
I'm a huge Steinbeck fan, and I think...
So am I.
Oh, we can nerd out for a while then. Amazing.
Welcome to you and the Steinbeck fan club. Welcome to your Takeout Outtake Especial. It's going to have to be an abbreviated one. I got 3 guests. We can't do the 3 questions for all 3 guests, so we're going to do 1 question of the 3 threshold questions, which you know and love. For our guests, Jesse Moss, Tony Gerber, and Marine Capt. Janessa Goldbeck. So, I usually ask favorite movie, most influential book, favorite music. I'm going to shorten that to favorite movie.
Great, perfect. Dr. Strangelove. It inspired this film. I mean, a great satire, but a very real consideration.
You can't fight here. This is the war room.
So we looked at that film. We looked at the set design in that movie. It inspired this film. It's not as funny, but I think it offers a sort of playful consideration of a very real threat, and I think audiences kind of need that now.
Tony.
Robert Altman's MASH.
Mm-hmm.
You think about the complexity of tone. It's funny. It's tragic. Right? And that, I think, was an important sort of touchstone for us in terms of this, that it's human. It's not one thing or another.
Janessa.
Whale Rider. It's a movie about a young woman in New Zealand it's sort of a mystical film about someone who's charged with leadership and is in an unconventional way, but it's just a beautiful film about family and overcoming norms and changing society. So, yeah, that's my favorite.
Holy cow, you guys are so efficient. All right, most influential, what's your book?
Book. Great. Wow. I'm thinking in the context of this film. I would say for me as a documentary storyteller, John Krakauer's Into the Wild, very human, but also deals with big themes. And I think that's what I loved about this film is we got to know the people involved who are putting this together, who are participating. And it's a political story, but it's also a personal story. And I think that helped me connect with this in an important way.
Tony?
You know, I've been reading a lot of Patricia Highsmith lately, maybe because of this Ripley series, but there's something, her probing of the darkness in all of us is really quite fascinating.
Nessa?
I'm a huge Steinbeck fan, and I think...
So am I.
Oh, we can nerd out for a while then. Amazing.
Welcome to you and the Steinbeck fan club, of which I consider myself the honorary president.
I had no idea,
Yes.
but how exciting. Grapes of Wrath is my favorite book. I think it does an amazing job. I mean, he's just a beautiful writer, but also just really shows sort of the depths of struggle that people face, and also how government can be a positive force in people's lives and also a very scary one. I think it is very timely. And I wish that we had more empathetic portraits of Americans of all stripes.
Could not agree more. That's it, folks. We'll see you next week.